I'd always thought my life was a steady thing, like the hum of the refrigerator in our kitchen. Constant, reliable, unnoticed until it stops. My wife, Clara, was the center of it all. 10 years married, 2 kids, a house with a sloping yard in a quiet suburb. She was a painter. Her canvases splashed with colors I didn't always understand but admired anyway. I worked in logistics, moving boxes from one place to another, a job that paid the bills and let me come home to her every night. We weren't perfect, nobody is, but we were good. Or so I thought. It started with the phone calls. She'd step outside to take them, her voice low, her laughter slipping through the cracked window like a secret I wasn't meant to hear. I didn't think much of it at first. Clara had friends, a life beyond me, and I wasn't the jealous type. But then there were the late nights. She'd say she was at the studio working on a piece, but the paint on her hands was always dry when she got home. Her excuses were thin, stretched like canvas over a frame too big for it. One evening, I decided to surprise her. The kids were at my sister's, and I thought I'd bring takeout to the studio. Maybe share a quiet moment amid her brushes and turpentine. The building was dark when I arrived, the windows blank. Her car wasn't there. I called her, no answer. I drove home, the food cold in the passenger seat, my mind buzzing. She came back at midnight, smelling of lavender and something sharper, like metal. Long day, she said, kissing my cheek. I nodded, but the hum in my chest had stopped. The next week I followed her. It wasn't planned. I'm not that guy, or I wasn't. But when she left the house with a hurried, "I'll be late," I grabbed my keys. She drove across town, not to the studio but to a diner I'd never seen, one with neon lights flickering like a bad omen. I parked across the street, watched her slide into a booth. A man joined her, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face I knew. Daniel Harper, my old college roommate. He'd been at our wedding, toasted us with a grin I'd thought was genuine. Now his hand rested on hers, and she didn't pull away. They left together, her laugh echoing as they climbed into his truck. I followed, my knuckles white on the wheel, until they stopped at a motel, the kind with hourly rates and peeling paint. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. The truth was a blade, cutting through the life I'd built. Clara, my Clara, was unraveling everything with him. I drove home, the night pressing against my skull, and sat in the dark until she slipped in at dawn, whispering lies about her art. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Rage was there, hot and alive, but something colder grew beside it. Curiosity, maybe, or the need to understand how deep this went. Daniel Harper wasn't just a fling. He was a ghost from my past. A guy I trusted once. We'd shared dorm rooms, late-night talks about futures we couldn't predict. He'd been charming then, the kind of charm that got him what he wanted: jobs, women, attention. I'd never envied it until now. I started digging, quietly, methodically, like unpacking a shipment at work. Clara's phone was locked, but her laptop wasn't. Late one night, while she slept, I scrolled through her emails. There they were, messages to him, dozens of them, stretching back months. "Miss you already," she wrote after a weekend we'd spent as a family. "Can't wait to feel you again." Sent the day she'd claimed a migraine and stayed home. No mention of me, no guilt, just eagerness. I read until my eyes burned, each word a splinter under my skin. Then there were the photos, hidden in a folder labeled sketches. I found them, snapshots of her and Daniel, laughing in places I didn't recognize. One showed her in a dress I'd bought her, his arm around her waist. Another had them by a lake, her head on his chest. I stared at that one longest, the way her smile curved for him, brighter than it ever did for me. I saved everything to a drive, wiped my tracks, and closed the laptop. Sleep didn't come. The next day, I called in sick and went to Daniel's place. He lived in a condo downtown, all glass and steel, paid for by some tech job he'd bragged about on social media. I didn't knock. I just watched. Clara's car pulled up at noon. She went inside, stayed for hours. When she left, her hair was mussed, her steps quick. I followed her again, this time to a grocery store, where she bought ingredients for a dinner she'd later serve me, humming like nothing had changed. I started noticing things. The way she'd tilt her head when she lied, the lavender scent that clung to her more often now. She was careful, but not careful enough. I found a receipt in her purse. Coffee for two. Dated a day she'd said she was alone. A motel keycard slipped out of her coat pocket once. She snatched it back, laughing it off as a mistake. I let her think I believed her. The colder part of me was growing, sharpening, waiting. Knowledge is a weight. Sits on you, changes how you move. I carried Clara's betrayal like a stone in my gut, but I didn't let it show. At breakfast, I'd pour her coffee and smile while she talked about her day, knowing half of it was fiction. The kids, Lila, 8, and Max, 5, kept us tethered, their chatter filling the silences I couldn't. Clara was good with them, always had been, and that made it worse. How could she build this other life and still tuck them in at night? I needed more than emails and photos. I needed proof that wouldn't dissolve if she talked her way out of it. So I bought a camera, small, discreet, the kind hunters use to track game. I hid it in her studio, behind a stack of canvases, angled toward the door. She didn't go there often anymore, but I figured Daniel might. I was right. 2 days later, the footage showed them, her leading him in, their hands tangled, their mouths meeting before the door even closed. They stayed an hour, left separately. I watched it alone, the grainy images looping in my mind. I didn't stop there. I tracked her car with an app I'd installed on her phone months ago, back when I thought it was just for safety. She went to Daniel's 3 times that week, always when I was at work. I called a friend, Mike, who owed me a favor. He's a PI, the kind who doesn't ask too many questions. Tail her, I said. Tell me everything. He did. He saw them at the diner, the motel, even a park where they sat on a bench, her head in his lap. Mike's report was clinical, detached, but it gutted me all the same. The kids noticed something. Lila asked why I was quiet, her big eyes searching mine. I hugged her, said Daddy was tired. Max just clung to me more, sensing the shift. Clara didn't see it or didn't care. She kept up her act, cooking dinners, kissing me goodnight, her lips tasting of lies. I started sleeping on the couch, claiming back pain. She didn't argue. I couldn't confront her yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted her to feel it, the slow unraveling of her world, the way mine had. I began planning. Not just revenge, but something bigger. Something that would leave scars she couldn't paint over. Daniel, too. He'd taken what was mine, and I'd make sure he regretted it. The camera was just the start. Days bled into weeks, and I became a shadow in my own life. Work was a blur. Boxes moved, orders filled. My hands doing the job while my mind spun. Clara kept her routine, oblivious to the web tightening around her. I fed her just enough trust to keep her careless. Small gestures, a smile here, a question about her art there. She'd ramble about brushstrokes and inspiration, her eyes bright with the lie of it all. I nodded, storing every word. Mike kept digging. He found out Daniel was married, too. His wife, Rachel, was a nurse, sweet-faced and unaware, judging by the photos Mike snapped of her at the hospital. They had no kids, but she wore a ring he'd given her, a detail that twisted the knife in me. Clara wasn't his only betrayal. He was tearing apart 2 homes. I wondered if Rachel knew, if she felt the same hum stop in her chest. I didn't tell her. Not yet. I started planting seeds. At dinner one night, I mentioned Daniel casually, watching Clara's face. Ran into him downtown. I lied. He looked good. Said he's been busy. Her fork froze midair, just for a second, before she smiled and said, "Oh, really? That's nice." Her voice was too light, too practiced. I let it drop, but the seed was there, sprouting doubt. I did it again a few days later, asking if she'd seen him, since they'd always gotten along. She laughed it off, but her eyes darted to the side. She was rattled. The camera caught more. They didn't just meet at the studio. They used our house once, when I was at a late shift and the kids were with my sister. I watched the footage on my laptop, headphones in, my pulse thudding. Clara led him to our bedroom, the one we'd painted together when we moved in. They stayed an hour, her leaving first, him slipping out the back. I rewatched it, memorizing every second, the way she touched him, the ease of it. My house, my bed. The stone in my gut turned to fire. I started breaking her down, subtle at first. I'd move things, her keys, her sketchbook, just enough to make her question herself. She'd frown, mutter about losing her mind. I'd find them later, all helpful smiles. Then I canceled her art supply delivery, claiming a mix-up at work. She scrambled to reorder, stressed, her perfect mask slipping. I wanted her off balance, frayed. So when the real blow came, she'd have nowhere to hide. Daniel was next. I knew his routines now: gym at 6, coffee at 8, office till 5. I followed him once, saw him charm a barista with that same grin he'd used on Clara. I didn't approach him. Instead, I sent an anonymous note to his office. She's not the only one who knows. No signature, no specifics. Let him sweat. Let him wonder. The kids were my anchor. Lila's drawings covered the fridge. Stick figures of us, smiling under a yellow sun. Max clung to my leg each morning, babbling about dinosaurs. I held them tighter, shielding them from the storm I was brewing. Clara didn't deserve them, but they didn't deserve this. I'd protect them no matter what came next. I met Rachel. Not by chance. I tracked her shifts, waited outside the hospital one evening. She was tired, her scrubs wrinkled, but she smiled when I introduced myself as an old friend of Daniel's. We talked over coffee at a place nearby. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. He's been distant, hasn't he? Her eyes clouded, and she nodded. Work, he says. I leaned in, voice soft. It's not work. I slid a photo across the table, one of Daniel and Clara at the diner, snapped by Mike. Her hand shook as she stared at it. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. She deserved better. So did I. Rachel didn't cry. She asked questions: who, how long, where. I gave her the basics, left the rest for her to find. She'd confront him, I knew it, and that was the point. Let Daniel feel the walls closing in. Let Clara hear it from him, panicked and sloppy. I wanted chaos, not just for them, but for me to shape. Back home, Clara was slipping. She burned dinner one night, snapped at Lila for spilling juice. I played the calm husband, cleaning up, soothing the kids. You okay? I asked, all concern. She waved me off, said she was tired. I knew why. Mike had seen her with Daniel that afternoon, hurried and tense. The note had worked. Daniel was cracking, and she was catching the fallout. I upped the ante. I called her gallery, posing as a client, canceled her next show. Personal reasons, I said. They didn't question it. When she found out, she'd unravel more. Her art was her shield, and I was stripping it away. Then I left a motel keycard on the kitchen counter, the one she'd dropped months ago. She found it that night, froze, stared at me. Where'd this come from? She asked, voice tight. I shrugged. Found it in the laundry. Weird. Huh. Her face paled, and she mumbled something about a friend's trip. I smiled, letting her squirm. Revenge wasn't enough. I wanted ruin, slow, deliberate, a masterpiece of its own. They'd feel it soon. Clara was unraveling faster now, threads of her composure pulling loose like a badly stitched seam. She'd stare at me across the breakfast table, her eyes searching for cracks in my mask, but I kept it smooth, polished. The kids gave me purpose, their laughter a lifeline through the haze. Lila asked once why Mommy seemed mad all the time. I told her grown-ups get busy, kissed her forehead, and sent her to play. Inside, I was a furnace, burning slow and steady. Rachel had acted. Mike saw her storm out of their condo, Daniel trailing behind, his face red and pleading. She'd thrown the photo at him. I'd bet on it, and now he was scrambling. He called Clara that night. I heard her whispering in the bathroom, her voice sharp with panic. What did you tell her? She hissed. I stood outside the door, silent, my breath shallow. She didn't know I was there, didn't know how much I'd already set in motion. When she came out, her smile was brittle. Headache, she said, brushing past me. I nodded, letting her think she was safe. I went deeper. Daniel's tech job was his pride. A cushy gig with a corner office and a team that kissed his ring. I knew a guy there. Tom. An old coworker who'd moved up. I called him, kept it casual. Daniel still strutting around like he owns the place? Tom laughed, said yeah. But the guy's been distracted lately. I planted a seed. Heard he's been sloppy. Maybe cutting corners. Tom didn't bite right away. But I knew he'd watch closer now. A whisper here. A nudge there. Daniel's castle would crumble brick by brick. Clara's gallery cancellation hit her hard. She got the call while I was fixing the sink. Really just listening. What do you mean, personal reasons? She snapped, pacing the kitchen. Her voice climbed. Frantic. I didn't cancel anything. I tightened a bolt, my face blank, while she ranted about lost time, lost exposure. When she hung up, she slumped against the counter, hands shaking. Everything okay? I asked, all innocence. She glared at me, but there was fear in it now. Good. That night, I left another clue. A receipt from the diner, tucked into her coat pocket. She'd find it soon, and the questions would gnaw at her. How did it get there? Who knew? I wanted her mind to churn, to drown in doubt. Meanwhile, I watched the kids sleep, their small chests rising and falling. They deserved a mother who didn't trade them for lavender-scented lies. I'd make sure they got justice, even if it meant torching everything first. Daniel cracked wide open 3 days later. Mike texted me. Rachel had kicked him out and he was crashing at a buddy's place, bags piled in his truck. She'd found more than the photo, Mike said. Texts, emails, a whole trail he hadn't bothered to hide. Idiot. Clara felt it too. She came home late, eyes red, claiming a friend was in crisis. I didn't push. I just watched her fidget, her lies thinning like ice under a boot. I turned up the heat. I sent Rachel a package, anonymous, of course. Inside were copies of Clara's emails to Daniel, the ones I'd pulled from her laptop, plus a few studio photos from the camera. I added a note. He's not worth it. Neither is she. Let her have the ammo to bury him. She'd use it, I was sure. Nurses don't mess around when you cut them deep. Daniel would spin, point fingers, and Clara would catch the shrapnel. At home, I kept dismantling her. I accidentally spilled wine on one of her unfinished canvases. A big one she'd been prepping for weeks. Oh no, I'm so sorry, I said, mopping it up while she stared, speechless. Her hands clenched, but she didn't yell. She couldn't, not without tipping her hand. Later, I heard her crying in the shower, muffled sobs she thought I wouldn't catch. I did. Every sound fueled me. I hit Daniel next. I hacked his social media. Not hard, he still used the same password from college. I posted a vague status from his account. Sometimes you lose everything and don't even see it coming. His friends chimed in, confused, worried. He'd scramble to explain, look unhinged. Then I emailed his boss from a burner account, attaching a screenshot of him and Clara at the motel, timestamped during work hours. Thought you should know, I wrote. No name, no trace. Let the whispers start. Clara found the receipt that night. She stormed into the living room, waving it like a flag. Where'd this come from? She demanded, voice shaking. I shrugged, calm as stone. No idea. Yours, isn't it? She faltered, stammered something about a mistake, then fled to the bedroom. I smiled into my coffee. She was circling the drain now, and I was just getting started. The kids kept me grounded, but even they couldn't stop the storm brewing in me. Lila drew me a picture, us four holding hands under a rainbow. I pinned it to the fridge, my throat tight. Clara barely noticed. She was distracted, jumping at every noise, checking her phone like it might bite her. Daniel hadn't called in days, not since Rachel blew up his life. I wondered if he'd told Clara yet, if she knew how close the walls were. Rachel didn't waste time. Mike saw her at a lawyer's office, divorce papers probably. She'd mailed Daniel's stuff to his buddy's place, including a box tagged, trash. I pictured him digging through it, frantic, while she moved on. Good for her. I sent her one more gift, a USB with the studio footage, labeled, for your case. She'd know what to do. Daniel's ruin was her weapon now, and I'd handed her the trigger. Clara's paranoia grew. She asked me once, out of nowhere, if I'd been to her studio. Why would I? I said, flipping through a magazine. Her jaw tightened, but she dropped it. I'd moved the camera by then, hid it in our garage instead. Caught her the next day, pacing, muttering to herself, her purse spilling keys and that damn motel card again. She was falling apart, and I was the ghost pulling the strings. I struck Daniel's job next. Tom called me. Rumors were swirling, thanks to my email. The boss had pulled Daniel in, asked about personal conduct. He'd talked his way out, barely, but the damage was done. Coworkers stared, whispered. I upped it. Sent another email, this time with a photo of him and Clara at the park, her head in his lap. He's costing you credibility, I wrote. Tom said Daniel was on thin ice now, one slip from gone. Perfect. That night, Clara broke. She cornered me in the kitchen, eyes wild. Are you doing this? She hissed, voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. Doing what? I asked, peeling an apple blade steady. She stared, searching, then backed off, muttering. I let her go. She didn't have proof, just fear, clawing at her. I'd give her more to chew on soon. The air in the house thickened, heavy with unspoken things. Clara stopped pretending as much. She'd leave without explanations, come back silent. The kids felt it. Max clung to me more. Lila asked too many questions. I kept them close, built forts out of blankets, told them stories about dragons and knights. Clara watched sometimes, her face a mask I couldn't read. Did she suspect? Did she care? Daniel's world kept crumbling. Tom texted. Daniel had a blowout at work, yelled at a junior guy, got written up. The photos had spread. Someone pinned one to the break room board, a blurry shot of him and Clara. He tore it down, but the stain stuck. His boss called him in again, and this time he didn't talk his way out. Suspension pending review. I toasted myself with a beer that night, quiet on the couch, while Clara paced upstairs. I pushed her further. I left a lavender candle burning in the living room. One she'd bought, the scent she wore with him. When she saw it, her face drained. Where'd this come from? She asked, voice small. Found it in the closet, I said, flipping channels. Thought you'd like it. She stared, then snuffed it out, hands trembling. I hid a smile. Every move was a cut, shallow but precise. Rachel filed for divorce. I saw the public notice online. She'd used the footage, cited infidelity. Daniel's name was mud now, splashed across legal docs for anyone to see. Clara didn't know yet, but she'd feel it soon. I sent her an anonymous text from a burner. He's done. You're next. She read it at dinner, her fork clattering to the plate. Wrong number, she mumbled, but her eyes were frantic. I chewed my steak, calm as ever. I saved the best for last. I'd found Clara's old sketchbook, the one from our early years, full of drawings of me, us. I mailed it to Daniel's buddy's place, no note, just the book. Let him see what she'd traded away. Let it twist the knife. Revenge wasn't loud yet. It was a whisper, building to a scream. Clara was a ghost now, haunting her own life. She barely ate, her cheeks hollowing out, her hands restless. The kids noticed. Lila asked if Mommy was sick. Max just stared at her across the table. I said she was tired, kept them distracted with games and stories. But Clara's eyes followed me, sharp and scared, like she was piecing it together. She didn't have the full picture. Not yet. But she knew something was wrong. Daniel hit bottom. Tom called. He was fired, escorted out after a shouting match with his boss. The photos, the rumors, the suspension. It all crashed down. He'd lost the job, the condo, Rachel. I drove by his buddy's place, saw him sitting on the curb, head in his hands, truck packed with what little he had left. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. His ruin was a painting I'd finished, vivid and complete. I tightened the noose on Clara. I found an old photo of her and Daniel from college. Innocent then, a group shot I'd kept. I left it on the counter, circled their faces in red. She saw it that afternoon, froze, then tore it up, her breaths ragged. Why's this out? she snapped. Cleaning the attic, I said, shrugging. Thought it was cute. She didn't buy it. Her hands shook as she swept the pieces into the trash. I watched, silent, letting her drown in it. The sketchbook hit Daniel hard. I knew it when Clara's phone buzzed late, him calling. She didn't answer, just stared at the screen, then turned it off. I'd listen to his voicemail later, cracking her passcode. What the hell, Clara? Why'd you send this? His voice was raw, broken. She didn't know I'd done it. Didn't know how deep I'd dug. I deleted it, left her wondering. That night, I set the final trap. I booked a motel room, the same one they'd used, under her name, left the confirmation email open on her laptop. She'd find it soon, panic, think someone was onto her. I wanted her to run to him to expose herself fully. Then I'd strike, hard and permanent. The kids slept soundly as I planned, their innocence my fuel. Clara and Daniel would pay, together in ruins. Daniel called her at midnight. I heard the buzz, saw her slip outside to answer. I followed, silent, standing by the window. You sent it, he shouted, loud enough for me to catch. I didn't, she hissed back, desperate. Then who did, Clara? Who knows? She didn't have an answer. Just please, her voice breaking. He hung up, and she stood there, staring at the dark yard, shoulders shaking. I went back to bed, left her to rot in it. The next day I struck. I kept the footage, every frame from the studio, the house, the garage. I edited it into a reel. Her and Daniel, laughing, touching, betraying. I burned it to a disc, mailed copies to her gallery friends, her parents, his old college buddies. No note, just the raw truth. Let them see who she really was. Let her explain it away. I sent one to Rachel, too. She'd earned it. Clara went to the motel that afternoon. Mike tailed her, saw her check in, find the note. She called Daniel again, no answer. She sat in the room an hour, then left, her face a mask of dread. When she got home, I was in the garage, tinkering with the lawnmower. Rough day, I asked, wiping my hands. She stared, nodded, said nothing. The kids were at my sister's. I'd planned it that way. Tonight was hers to fall. The discs hit their marks. Her phone started buzzing. Friends first, then her mom, voice shrill through the speaker. Clara, what is this? What's going on? She fumbled, claimed it was a prank. A mistake. I listened from the hall, my pulse steady. She hung up, called Daniel again, straight to voicemail. He'd blocked her, I figured. Good. She was alone now, cornered by her own choices. I left one last gift. A painting she'd done years ago, of us on our honeymoon. All bright blues and hope. I hung it in the living room, a spotlight on what she'd lost. She saw it that night, froze, then sank to the couch, hands over her face. Why's this up? She whispered. Felt nostalgic, I said, sipping tea. She didn't look at me, just sat there, crumbling. The end was close. The fallout spread like wildfire. Her gallery friends dropped her. No calls, no shows, just silence. Her mom showed up the next day, red-eyed, demanding answers. How could you? She kept saying, while Clara stammered excuses. Editing tricks, old footage, lies. I played dumb, offered coffee, let her mom tear into her. Lila and Max were still at my sister's. I wouldn't let them see this. Clara's world was shrinking, walls collapsing, and I was the architect. Daniel surfaced online drunk, ranting on a friend's post about betrayal and snakes. His buddies piled on, some laughing, some disgusted. Rachel commented, "You did this to yourself." Clara saw it, I made sure. She left her phone unlocked, screen open to the thread. She scrolled, hands trembling, then locked herself in the bedroom. I knocked once, asked if she needed anything. Silence. Fine by me. I called my lawyer that afternoon, quietly, from work. Divorce papers, custody plans, the works. He'd draft it fast, keep it clean. Clara didn't know yet, but she'd lose everything, me, the kids, the house. I documented it all. The footage, the receipts, her unraveling. She'd have no ground to stand on. I wanted her to feel the weight, the way I had. every step crushing her deeper. She tried to rally that night. "We need to talk," she said, voice shaky, sitting me down. I messed up." She didn't say Daniel's name, just vague apologies, tears streaming. "Can we fix it?" she asked, reaching for my hand. I pulled back, looked at her like she was a stranger. "Fix what?" I said, cold. She faltered, sobbed, begged. I stood, walked away. The painting glowed in the corner, mocking her. I slept on the couch again, dreaming of the kids' laughter, their small hands in mine. Clara's ruin was almost complete. Just one more push. I'd saved the cruelest for last. A twist she'd never see coming. She thought this was the bottom. She was wrong. The kids came home the next morning, bounding in with hugs and stories. Clara tried to smile, but it cracked. She looked hollow, a shell wearing my wife's face. Lila asked why she was sad. Clara mumbled about a bad week. I took them outside, kicked a ball around, let her stew inside. She watched from the window, eyes sunken, knowing she was losing them too. I'd filed the papers that morning, served by evening. I'd told the lawyer. She'd see soon. Daniel hit rock bottom. Mike spotted him at a bar, sloppy, arguing with the bartender. He'd lost his truck, repossessed probably, and his buddy had kicked him out. Homeless now, crashing on couches or worse. I sent him one last package. A photo of him and Clara at the lake with "Remember?" scrawled on it. Let him choke on it wherever he landed. The server came at 6. Clara answered, took the envelope, opened it while I read to Max upstairs. I heard her gasp, the papers hitting the floor. She stormed up, face twisted. "You're doing this?" she yelled, waving the divorce filing. "You're taking them?" I set the book down, met her eyes. "You did this?" I said, quiet, firm. She sank to her knees, sobbing, begging again. Lila peeked out, scared. I scooped her up, took them both downstairs. Clara stayed, a heap on the floor. I moved out that night, temporary, to my sister's with the kids. Clara called, texted, pleaded. I didn't answer. The house was hers for now, but not for long. My lawyer had it covered. She'd get nothing, not even the painting. I'd take it, hang it somewhere new, a reminder of what I'd survived. She texted one last time, "I'm sorry." I deleted it. The next day, I heard she'd gone to her mom's, bags packed, face bruised with exhaustion. Her gallery posted a notice, her work pulled, no explanation. Friends stopped calling. She was a ghost now, drifting through the wreckage I'd built. One final blow waited, and I'd deliver it clean. A week later, I finished it. Clara's life was ash, but I wanted the embers cold. I kept one ace, the studio lease, in my name from years back. I canceled it, had her stuff boxed and sent to her mom's. Canvases, brushes, all of it, gone from her sanctuary. She called screaming when she found out. "You can't," she cried. "It's mine." I hung up, let her rage into the void. Daniel washed up in a shelter. I heard, broke, alone, a shadow of the guy I'd known. I sent Rachel a note, not anonymous this time. "You're free now," I wrote with my name. She replied, "So are you." We met once, over coffee, swapped stories of survival. She smiled, healing. I did too, lighter than I'd been in months. The kids adjusted fast. Lila drew new pictures, me, them, my sister's dog, no Clara. Max asked about her once. I said she was away, kept it simple. They'd know someday when they were ready. I got a new place, small but ours, hung the honeymoon painting above the fireplace. It wasn't pain anymore. It was triumph, a flag I'd planted. Clara tried one last reach, showed up at my sister's, begging to see the kids. I met her at the door, calm, unyielding. "Not now," I said. "Not ever, if I can help it." She looked small, faded, her lavender scent gone. "I loved you," she whispered. "You loved him." I shot back and closed the door. She left and I exhaled, free. The revenge was done, cruel and complete. They'd lost everything, each other, their worlds, themselves. I'd lost too, but I'd rebuilt. The kids laughed in the yard, the sun warm, and I stood there, whole again. Clara and Daniel could haunt their ruins. I was done carrying them.